All right, so we are this morning on the back side of our study of the book of Revelation. We have next week where we're going to talk about this moment where Jesus Christ comes down on a beautiful white horse and he just puts an end to all of the sin and the chaos and the devastation of the world that we deal with. But this morning, we have to deal with the devil first. And so in order to get there, we have to talk a little bit about where we are right now. Now, for those of you that are new, you just were terrified by that sermon bumper, let me just catch you up on what's going on. We're in the middle of a study of the book of Revelation. In the book of Revelation, there is this conversation about this 7-year period of time, which is called the tribulation. We, right now, living in 2021, are not in the Great Tribulation. If you're looking at the book of Revelation, it seems like we are somewhere in chapter 6 between verse 2 and verse 8. That's where it seems like we are right now in 2021. But because we are studying this book, it pushes us into future events. And so what we are studying is this 7-year period called the tribulation. Last week, we made it to the midpoint, so we made it 3.5 years in. And at that point, we saw this person called the Antichrist, and he actually killed the 2 prophets in the city of Jerusalem. When that moment happened, there was just sort of this chaos. There were those 144,000 who have been marked for a testimony of Jesus Christ. In the last days, they fled Jerusalem. They went into the hills, and then the Antichrist set his throne up in the middle of the temple of God. And then we saw the 2 prophets raised from the dead. And now we're in the middle of the next 3.5 years where this Antichrist figure has become a world leader. He's become a dominant world leader. And so while that's sort of going on in his world, in God's world, in heaven, he is pouring out the last of the woes that are to come upon the earth that will bring us all the way to the end. So there were 7 seals that were opened. The majority, it seems like, have released sort of an end times culture that is on the earth today. And then we see the trumpets that are in the beginning of the tribulation, and now we see the bowls that are in the end. The first bowl that gets poured out, humanity sort of experiences these absolutely miserable sores. The second bowl that gets poured out kills everything in the ocean. The ocean turns to blood. The third bowl that gets poured out, all of the water becomes extremely toxic. Nobody can drink anything. And then we get to the last bowl when it gets poured out, and it dries up the river channel called the Euphrates that creates a roadway, if you will, for the army that would follow the Antichrist to come against the city of Jerusalem. And so that's sort of the view from 10,000 feet from the heavens. But I said that today we're going to talk about how we, as Christians, can deal with the devil. Because the same devil that is going to be in operation that we see here in the book of Revelation, who appears as a dragon, is the same devil that is sort of roaming around today that we have to deal with. And it's interesting, if you start in the book of Genesis, we see Satan as a snake, just a simple snake. But then if we go all the way to the book of Revelation, now he's a dragon. And it seems like this is a little bit how it works in our lives, where we don't recognize a dragon as a snake. And so I'm not really bothered by the snake. I might flirt with him, play around with him, let him crawl through the house, leave the door open because I really don't care. Maybe even leave the window cracked. Who cares if a snake gets in the house? However, if I see a dragon sitting in the living room, I'm probably not coming home. But what has seemed to be the pattern of modern humanity is that we just keep letting these snakes in until suddenly there's a dragon in the middle of the house and we don't know what to do. And so today we're going to talk a little bit how we get there and how we get out of there. And so why don't we do this? Why don't we just read where we are in the book of Revelation, and then we'll talk about it. Chapter 14, beginning at verse 6. John says, "Then I saw another angel flying directly overhead with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people. And he said with a loud voice, 'Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. And worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water. Another angel, a second, followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality." And another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger. And he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, these worshipers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name." Verse 12, "Here is a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus." So there is this command to those who have gotten saved, who've put their faith in Jesus during the tribulation, that they are called to endure, that they are to keep the commands, and that they are to keep their faith in Jesus. Why is the message that was given to them the same message that is given to us? Because we read at the top, it's an eternal gospel. The gospel doesn't change. Our doctrine doesn't change. We might wear something different as we speak the doctrine. We might put the doctrine in a different package. We might yell it from the rooftops, or we might whisper it in a coffee shop. But at the end of the day, the doctrine is the same. The gospel doesn't change. What we believe, we should continue to believe. What we have believed, we should continue to live. It doesn't change just because it might get a little harder in a particular generation to live it out. The gospel doesn't shift. The gospel doesn't evolve. We might evolve in how we speak the gospel, but the gospel doesn't change. The commands do not change. And when we understand that, it allows us to sort of capture the word that is given for the church in the future and project it onto our lives today. So let's talk about this idea of keeping the commands, keeping the faith, and endurance. We'll start with endurance. Jesus talked about endurance to his disciples. In Matthew chapter 24 and verse 11, he said, "There will be many false prophets, and they will lead many astray. And because lawlessness will increase, the love of many will grow cold. But those in the end who endure will be saved." So those who endure to the end will be saved. What is a part of this endurance? It is just sort of dealing with the lawlessness that is increasing without allowing our love for God to decrease. So I might be in the middle of a situation where lawlessness is increasing, but the requirement for my love for God to remain is still intact. I don't get to love God less because lawlessness increases. And this is something that I think we have to really embrace in our current culture and in our current lifestyle, because it does seem like 50 years ago you hear stories and somebody might have had to deal with, I don't know, these things. And then today we have these conversations and it sounds like we have to deal with so much more. Well, does that mean that we have an excuse to not deal with it? No. No, every single one of us, regardless of how much is coming at us, we have to deal with what is coming at us. And so I recognize that because lawlessness will increase, there will probably be required of me more so that my love for God doesn't decrease. And I'm okay with that. This, by God's sovereign will, we were all born in this generation. By the will of God. You didn't choose to show up. I didn't choose to show up. But here we are. So I thank God that I'm here. I recognize that I might have more to deal with than a generation before me dealt with. But what that means is, in my weakness, He will be strong. So we, in our generation, will actually see a greater move or strength from God. Why? Because we're dealing with more lawlessness. And that's encouraging. Because it's pretty exciting to think that I get to see more of God because God chose us to be born in this generation. It's fantastic. But he also talked about this false prophecy, this season or this culture of false prophecies that will sort of emerge. There have always been false prophets, but it says in the last days there will be many, and they'll deceive many. And so I'm not one of these that likes to just be completely skeptical about every single thing I hear, but I do think it is important that we actually test what we hear. Because when we hear something that upon test is false, if we remain holding to that which is false, we will find ourselves living a lifestyle atop a lie. And if I live life atop a lie, that lie will never lead me to the truth. So I have to just recognize by testing this is a lie, reject the lie, and cling to truth. Clinging to truth might be the greatest challenge of our generation. Because there is so much information, it is actually impossible for us to determine what is right and what is wrong. The good news is the gospel is eternal, so whatever the gospel said was wrong is still wrong. Whatever the gospel said was a lie is still a lie. So if I hang on to the gospel, it gives me what I need to recognize truth. So that's what endurance looks like. He says you have to keep the commands. Now, I love this one because this is especially one that we don't like to talk much about. We like to say things like, you know what? Just do the best you can and just lean on grace. That's a disgrace. We've been commanded to actually keep the commands of God, to keep them. Jesus said it this way in John chapter 14 and verse 21. He said that you actually, whoever has my words and keeps them, he it is who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father. And I will love him, and I will manifest myself to him. What is the indicator that I love Jesus? That I keep his commands. That's the indicator. Jesus isn't just looking for somebody that says, I love Jesus. Jesus is looking for somebody that says, I love Jesus and keeps his commandments. That's who he's looking for. And he says, that's the one who will be loved by my Father, and I will love him, and I will manifest myself to him. Why is it important that Jesus manifest himself to us? We see right here the picture of the coming of the Lord. Because he said, I'm going to roll the heavens back like a scroll, and then my people will see me, and they will be caught up together with me. So Jesus will manifest himself to us. We will be caught up together with him. That's like an important thing. That's an important moment. How are we postured to experience the beauty of that moment? By having his commandments and keeping them. And he says, and you have to keep the faith. Keeping the faith. You know, I feel like I'm young enough I shouldn't think about dying. But when you read this passage that the Apostle Paul was speaking to Timothy, his son in the faith, you can't help but sort of push forward a few years and just think about, am I living a life today that puts me on track to be able to say that? In 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 7, he said, Timothy, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Henceforth, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not to me only, but to all who love his appearing. He was at a point in his life where he could look in the rearview mirror and say, I've done everything that God's called me to do. I have obeyed God willfully. I have obeyed God fully. Maybe year 7, I didn't obey him, but by year 9, I got it right. I stand complete in the call of God on my life. And he said, here I am. I finished. I fought the fight. I've kept the faith. He was ready to transition from where he was to the reward that God had for him. I don't want to think of this idea. I don't want to wake up one morning and the sky look a little bit hazy and think, uh-oh, I'm not ready today. Now, I know that's not anything that we have a problem with today, but 20 years ago when I was a kid, we preached so much from this position that we as kids, we weren't scared, we were aware. We like to today take anything that might make me a little bit uncomfortable with that, so we don't want to scare kids. No, we need to be aware that our lifestyle matters and Jesus is coming back and we need to be ready. That's not frightening, that's awareness. That is having the command so that now I have the choice to keep them. Parents, let me just say, you have an obligation to give your kids the gospel so that they have the commands. You're actually responsible for them to have the commands. Their faith is on them. They have to choose to serve God or reject him. But you have to choose whether or not you're going to give them the command. This is our responsibilities. Sometimes kids look at their parents like, parents are crazy. Of course we're crazy. We want our kids to go to heaven. That like does something to parents. There's like, we're always a little bit on edge. What's wrong with you? I'll tell you what's wrong with me. I want you to go to heaven. Like that's what's wrong with me. We have that push to get the gospel into their lives. So he says there's an endurance and there's a keeping of the faith and there's a keeping of the commands. That is the eternal gospel. So why and how can I keep this eternal gospel? Well, first of all, because there is this Babylon out there that is seeking to tempt us to do things that we don't want to do that are followed by guilt and frustration. And there will be a day when that Babylon has fallen, but Babylon, the spirit of Babylon, is still functioning and is still against us. So we need to understand it so we can look for it so that we can reject it. Now let's talk about that for a minute because it's going to get a little uncomfortable for 12 minutes. We have to, so let's just do it. We're in Revelation, it's there, it's fallen. We don't even know what it is. So let's deal with what it is and we can talk about how to resist it. In the Old Testament, Babylon, well, it started out as this Tower of Babel. So at the Tower of Babel, God had given a command. He said, everybody needs to spread out and just like live in the fullness of the land. Humanity decided we don't want to spread out. We want to go see what's going on with God. And so we're going to build a tower. We're going to reach the heavens and we're going to peek into the heavens and see what's going on with God. And God says, no, I'm not going to actually let you do that. You're not doing what I've asked you to do. So I'm going to scatter you. So he scattered the nations and the languages and all that happened at the Tower of Babel. That Tower of Babel became a central point in that city, which became Babylon. Babylon would rise and fall, and then it would come to a place where through King Nebuchadnezzar, it was reaching sort of its peak. When it reached its peak of world dominance, the Babylonian Empire, one of the things that they did was actually take over Jerusalem. They destroyed the temple. They took all of God's stuff, and they took all of God's people, where they enslaved God's people for 70 years. So when they talk about in the Old Testament, Babylon or the spirit of Babylon, I just want you to know they weren't saying that in a positive way. No one liked Babylon. Babylon was not a good thing. Babylon was the greatest exporter of sin on the earth. They were an evil, wicked empire. Fast forward to the New Testament, and we see Peter at one point call Rome Babylon. Now, obviously, Rome isn't Babylon. They're not even near each other. What was he saying? He was saying this spirit that was behind the sinfulness and the exportation of sin from Babylon is the same spirit that is hovering over and affecting the city of Rome. Rome was pushing its evil culture out. And because Rome was creating this evil culture and pushing it out, it was doing the same thing that Babylon had done. And so Peter was just recognizing upon Rome there was the same evil spirit that had been upon Babylon. And so we see this conversation where Babylon is sort of transitionary. Babylon is whatever and wherever there is this great sinfulness that is sort of being promoted and pushed out. So a Babylon today might be Hollywood, for instance. They would probably qualify. Or maybe Amsterdam or Cabo, or those are just cities that I've heard in Van Halen songs, so I assume they're probably not great. I don't actually know. I've never been to Amsterdam. But they sang about it, and it sounded like it was like Hollywood. So those places, it would be like that's an evil spirit. That's the spirit of Babylon. Well, we're going to get to the end days where there's going to be sort of this massive exportation of evil that's going to come from a centralized location, and eventually that centralized location will actually be destroyed. And he says, Babylon has fallen. Well, if we're talking about Babylon as exporting this evil, then that means every single one of us, even though we may not live in Babylon, every single one of us have to deal with the temptations that Babylon is emitting. Every single one of us we have to deal with a sinfulness in our culture that is demanding from us wrongdoing. It is demanding us to do things that the next day we're going to regret. Have you ever seen something to do? I'm going to shade this best I can. And at first glance, you're like, oh, that's not a good idea. But then the longer you hung around, it just seemed like, okay, maybe it's not such a bad idea. And then you were fully partaking in the moment, whatever that was. And then the next day you woke up and you're like, why did I do that? Okay, just me. I'm the only one. I'm the only one in this room. And these four guys over here. So we have these moments. What is that? That's just falling to Babylon. That's all that is. It's letting culture overwhelm us so that we do the thing that we don't want to do. And the thing is, we will get judged for our moment, but there's going to come a day where the culture itself will get judged for what it has done to humanity. I mean, think about what today is being exported and inviting us to participate in. I mean, think about the things. Like today's Halloween. This is one of those days where there's a whole lot that we can get into that is not good. There's a whole lot that we can look at that we shouldn't look at. There's a whole lot we can participate in that we should not participate in. And it's interesting how we have been so just sort of slowly led to the fire. Like if we look at the imagery that we accept today, just our willingness to be so comfortable with blood and with walking dead people and with sorcery. I mean, think about, we don't even almost look twice. It's like just part of society. It seems normal to us. But it's been increasing literally with each generation. If you're in your 40s, you can remember the Lost Boys. You remember this whole little just culture of vampires, and they were way cool, except they weren't. And then if you're in your 30s, it was Harry Potter, and he seemed like he was perfectly harmless, except he isn't. And then if you're in your 20s, you know exactly what the Twilight series, he probably got hung all up in. It doesn't seem like a big deal. It's a huge deal. From one generation to the next generation to the next generation, we have grown so much more comfortable with sinfulness and sorcery. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. You can go to a Christian event, like a Christian event today, and there will be the innocence of a cute little kid in a McDonald's Happy Meal box, which is just fine. And 7 kids later, there's this guy with a mask with blood coming out of his eyeballs and a sword where he's acting like he's going to kill somebody. Is that okay? It's not okay. This isn't okay. We have gotten to where we're just celebrating like blood. And when we go to the New Testament, we jump into the book of Acts, here's what we see very clearly. God said, look, I know we're bringing the Gentiles into a relationship with God, and they've lived so far from me. They've got a lot of strange practices, and we're going to have to work on those. But here, let's just start right here. For one, no immorality, like stop that. And then he said, stop eating things that are sacrificed to idols. So stop participating and being close to the devil. And then he says, stay away from blood. And then things strangled. There was this in temple worship to false gods. They were just sort of gory about their practices. And there was a destructiveness to their behavior that God says, look, we're going to work on these things as you follow me, but right out of the gate, these four, stay away from them. And yet today, people who love Jesus, we are so comfortable with death and blood and vampires and dead people walking and sorcery. And I talk like this and you look at me and you're like, how old are you? Like, it's 2021, man. It's an eternal gospel. It's an eternal gospel. And just because we've gotten comfortable with something doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean it was ever right. He says, stay away from it. We see this all the way back in Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 31. To God's people, he said, do not turn to mediums or necromancers. Do not seek them out so as to be made unclean by them. When we associate with things, when we watch things, when we just participate through observance, we make ourselves unclean. And then we deal with what we're dealing with and we wonder where it came from. And sometimes it's something as simple as what we've been watching. It might seem like it's funny. Like everybody's watching this. We're all, yeah, it's funny. It's sure funny until it's not funny. And this is what happens. We are growing far more in Christianity. We're growing far more comfortable with just seeking out, I'm going to use the word mediums, different ways to understand our future. Different ways to help us sort of make decisions. I might think, well, if I'm this sign, then I need to look for somebody who's that sign. You need to look for somebody who loves Jesus. That's who you need to look for. Say, but does that count? Is that all in the same lump? Of course it's in the same lump. Isaiah chapter 47 and verse 13. He said, for those who divide the heavens, in other words, this is a sign, and that's a sign, and that's a sign. And those who gaze at the stars, those who at the new moons make known what shall come upon you, behold, they are stubble, and they will be consumed by fire. So I can't be comfortable with things like astrology and zodiac signs and I just want to know what my sign is. You don't need to know what your sign is. Some people look at me sometimes like, well, you've never tried it. How do you know? I don't need to shoot myself in the foot to know it's going to hurt. There are just some things that are so obvious, I don't need to participate. I went years without cable. I don't know if it was because I was cheap. I don't know if it's because I was protecting myself. It's hard. It's blurry. I'm going to be honest. It's blurry. But I went decades with no cable. I moved to Florida. My house is under a whole bunch of oak trees, and my usual means of getting television, network television, so I can watch football, my usual means are gone. My antenna doesn't work under the trees. I kept going back to Best Buy. I would go to Walmart, Target, you name it. I tried every antenna I possibly could. Finally, I gave up. I said, I can't live like this. We have to have cable. I can't watch football on my phone. It's too small. This is not going to work. Part of my life was being sucked away. So we go get cable so that we can watch the Dallas Cowboys roll to dominance in the NFC East and one. All right, sorry. I digress. I digress. All right, but here's what I've noticed. Like in the decades absent from TV, like the movies right now, I'll see the imagery on the TV and I'm like, who thought of that? The devil thought of that. There's no other source where that imagery comes from. And I have no desire to go flirt with the devil. I hate shopping at the mall, despise the mall. The mall is not a favorite place for me, but on occasion I have to go to the mall because it's school shopping or whatever. And so you're there, and I notice because I'm in long stretches not being at the mall, and I'll be at the mall walking down the corridor, and you can look at these like window displays and stuff. I'm appalled at the just almost nakedness. I know I sound like an old man. But do you realize how comfortable we are getting with sin and we don't even know it? We don't even know it. And so we've become all sorts of comfortable with the imagery, and now it gets pushed into costumes. And now we're walking around and we're participating and we're seeing things, and we are what? We are clouding our sight. So if you say, yeah, but I bought a cool little costume, and good, great. You guys go house to house to house. I'm not telling us we don't have television, and I'm not telling you you can't go get candy from your neighbor. What I am saying is if you see a house and it's got nasty imagery, you go to the next house. Go to the next one. You just keep running and walking. Well, my neighborhood's full. Then go to another neighborhood. Well, we won't get as much candy. You might not get as much candy. That's actually true. Or you might get a whole bunch of candy. I have no idea. I actually don't care. What I care about is that I don't find myself standing in a porch with the devil. I don't want to stand on the porch with the devil. And I would encourage you to not want to stand on the porch with the devil. I know I read 2 texts out of the Old Testament. Let's jump to the New Testament. The Apostle Paul gives us a listing of all these things that he says you just need to stay away from. And in the middle of it is sorcery. That just encompasses all of those things that we just talked about. Sorcery, that word is all inclusive. And he says in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 21, he said, I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. Just stay away from it. It's not impossible. Say, well, it's hard. It might be hard, but it's not impossible. And so the next person that we see here now is this beast. So we get removed from this Babylon that has fallen, and now we have this beast. Who is this beast? This beast in the Old Testament, in the book of Daniel, he was called the Desolator. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul called him the man of lawlessness. John called him the antichrist. Here in the book of Revelation, he is called the beast. He is a political leader. He is not an entertainer. He is not a cult. Does not have cultural significance in the sense of Babylon. He is a political leader who gathers the nations and governs the world. That's who he is. I'm not looking to the entertainment field for the Antichrist to emerge. I'm looking for Babylon to emerge out of that space. But in the governmental space, this beast, this Antichrist, will emerge. He talked about him in Revelation chapter 13 and verse 1. John said, I saw a beast rise out of the sea, and he had 10 horns, and he had 7 heads, and he had 10 crowns upon his 10 horns, and blasphemous names written on his head. And the beast received his power from the dragon. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and his great authority. So Satan gives him his strength. This political figure does not have his strength because of culture. He does not have his strength because of economics. If you watch throughout the book of Revelation, you will see economics begin to fall. You will see just kind of the crumbling of world economies. That does not take the Antichrist out of play. Actually, it puts him into play because he's not propped up by an economy. He's not propped up by a culture. He's propped up by the devil himself. And here's what we need to fully recognize. The devil himself, who will be reigning supreme through the Antichrist, is the same devil who's tormenting you at home, and he's tormenting you at work, and he's hassling your family, and he's hassling your friends. And they're told in this moment, reject the mark, meaning reject this sign of the devil and make sure you worship God. It's the same command to us. But how do we do that? How do we actually do that in 2021? The same way we always have. In Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 25, it says very clearly, therefore, having put away all falsehood, let each one speak the truth with his neighbor. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. That phrase, give no opportunity to the devil, just simply means exactly what we just said. There's just some things we're not going to watch. There are just some things we're not going to participate in. There are just some things that we're not going to be around because we have no desire to make ourselves unclean with them. I don't want to give any opportunity to the devil. He does enough all by himself without me helping him out. I don't want to give him any opportunity, and I'm begging you to give him no opportunity. Stay in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 11. It says, put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. He has schemes. If he doesn't get you one way, he'll come a whole nother way. There are things I don't have to deal with at all today that I dealt with 10 years ago. But I've noticed something. I may not have to deal with that anymore, but now these like new frustrations emerge. These new battles, these new complications show up. He's always looking for a way in. And that's why we put on the whole armor of God. Sometimes it's just the shield of faith. The other times it's the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Sometimes it's just being willing to take the gospel wherever you go. That's your shoes or the gospel of peace. That I'm just taking the gospel. I'm just preaching the good news of Jesus. I'm just being that guy wherever it takes me. Sometimes that gets me away from him. Sometimes you need to walk away from him. Sometimes you need to stand and just hold your shield up. He's coming in different ways. It takes all of it to resist him. James chapter 4 and verse 7. Submitting yourselves therefore to God. There's a big one. Resist the devil and he will flee. I get that. But before you can resist the devil and he flees, it says submit yourselves therefore to God. We submit to a lot of stuff. We submit to a lot of ideas. How much of this stuff and how much of these ideas are centered in the gospel of God? Who are we submitting to? I don't mean who do we come hang out with on Sundays. I mean on Tuesday morning at 10:37, who are we submitting to? Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil and he will flee. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 7. I want to hang out here for a minute. He says in this text, and there's a whole lot to it, but it's big. He says, cast all your anxiety on Jesus because he cares for you. Cast all of it on Jesus because he cares for you. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith. Not your daddy's faith, not your mama's faith, not your husband's faith, not your wife's faith, not your friend's faith. Resist him firm in your faith. Here's what we absolutely know. That God will not allow our faith to be tempted more than we are able to withstand. Now, I have that promise. Now, I might be dealing with something that I don't want to deal with, but if I have the word, now I'm being tempted to not keep it. But because I have it, God says you have what you need to win this battle. That battle would not be allowed to come to you if you didn't have what was necessary to win the battle. Sometimes we make it sound like the devil actually has more power than God, that it's just all sort of random. It's actually not sort of random. The word that you have, God actually allows the word that you have to be hassled by the devil. But he doesn't allow the devil to hassle you in a space you can't win. And that's comforting. Because now what that means is I can't blame it on something else. I can actually control this. I can actually own this war. I can actually I can see victory. And so now I'm in the middle of this and I know I can win this. So he says very clearly, be sober-minded, be watchful, you're after the devil, like a roaring lion. He prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking to devour you. I want to jump to this sober-mindedness, because what does it mean to cast your care on Jesus? Like we hear that a lot. I'm just upset, I'm worried. People, just cast it on Jesus. What does that mean? What does it mean? It's not like a shirt I can just throw over here and put it in the dirty clothes. What do you mean, cast your care on Jesus? Just cast it. No, you repeated yourself. What do you mean? I'm the only one that has questions like this. I'm the only one. What does it mean? Here is what it means. It starts with having a sober mind. For some people, to get a sober mind, there's just so much against them that they find themselves going to different ways to find sobriety or find peace. If I'm just tormented and disturbed, I might go to a bottle, I might go to a pill, I might go to something I can smoke, I might go to something in order to just find peace. I'm trying to have a sober mind through what? Intoxication. For you, if that's like let me just throw it out like this. God says, hey, don't be drunken with wine where it is an excess, but be filled with the Spirit. Speaking to yourself in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to your heart, in your heart to the Lord. If you're one of those that it's kind of a substance thing for you, man, all I would say is just when you're having one of those moments, just start worshiping Jesus. Just start worshiping him and that peace will come. What is coming? A sober mind. We see this when Saul, the king, was being tormented by the devil in the Old Testament. David would come and just play the harp. He would just play worship before the king and it would quiet the soul, the mind of the king. He says, be sober-minded. Why do you have to be sober-minded? Because I can't be watchful if I can't see. I need sobriety in my mind so that I can see. Now, what am I looking for? I'm looking for the area where I've given opportunity to the devil. I'm looking for an area where I have opened the door and now I'm dealing with this. Let me explain it like this. The devil does two things. He's either going to accuse you of something that you've already repented of, or he's going to lie to you. Here's what a lie looks like. You do something, and as a result of what you did, you didn't win. That means you lost or you failed. So you failed. We all lose. We all fail. We all do stuff that doesn't work. Some people can push past that. Other people, it's not just a loss. It's not just a failure point. Now suddenly they're a failure. Suddenly they're a loser. And the enemy is saying, you're never going to win. What is that? That's a lie. But I need to see where that came from. So I go and I say, wait a minute, I did lose. That's true. What is one of the, it says put on the whole armor of God. What is one of the armor? It's truth. You have to wear truth. So it's true that I lost. That's not a lie. I did lose. But why did I lose? Well, you lost because you didn't put enough time in. Why didn't I put enough time in? Because you got distracted playing video games. Why did you get distracted playing video games? Because I can fix that. Now through a sober mind, I've seen something. Now when somebody says, yo, hey, get online. No. I'm going to resist that. Why am I resisting that? Because I need to put more time in so I can win. Because I want to win. So my sober-mindedness allowed me to see how the devil was creeping in like a stupid little snake, just something that seemed harmless, but all of a sudden it's a dragon in my room. So that's how we resist him. And let me say this. Stop rebuking what you have not resisted. This is something I feel like all the time. Like anytime the devil's frustrating me, I just rebuke him. In Jesus' name, get out. Well, you let him in. We rebuke him when he just comes against us for no reason. That's when I stand in the name of Jesus and rebuke you. Get out of my way, devil. I'm just obeying Jesus. I'm on the road. You're in my way. Get out of the way. I rebuke you. But when I've been sitting at home and I let him in through this decision, and I let him in through watching that, and I let him in through saying that, and I let him in through doing that, now I have to resist him. I don't rebuke him, I resist him. That means I stop doing this. Well, yeah, but Shawn, he's still here. Yeah, because you got a line of things you need to stop doing. And now I need to stop doing this. And now I need to stop doing this. And now the battle's getting easier. And it's getting easier because I'm resisting him. And now he's not climbing down on my head. And I get to the last one and I resist him and he goes. And just for good measure, now that he's out of the house, now I rebuke him. But God has not called us to rebuke whom he's called us to resist. Most of us are dealing with the devil because we haven't resisted him. But I promise you, by the word of the gospel of God, if you will resist him, he will flee.